And F5. You are on. If you use the microphone, this will pick you up a lot better.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
So my name is Nick Breault. I'm with Atlas Consulting Group, and the talk is going to be on the introduction to launching a medical device. I'm going to apologize in advance for the broken finger if it offends anyone, as I use this, which is also a medical device. Bandage, splint, class 1 medical device. So if you look at our board, we have a couple different medical devices, a stethoscope, a scalpel. These are both class 1 medical devices, which all the classifications for medical device are based on the risk that it presents. So the lowest risk is class 1, second highest is class 2, and the highest risk is class 3. The cranial implant is the device that I've worked with cranial maxillofacial implants for the last 6 years and helped launch a company from startup with this product. And that's a class 2 implantable medical device. The device on the bottom here is one of the first pacemakers ever made. Kind of looks like a yo-yo, but I thought it would be a good way not to infringe on anyone's copyright by showing the Medtronic pacemaker and other companies. So just to give you some of my background, I graduated from Central Connecticut State University as a mechanical engineer. From there, I had interned for a company called M2 Systems, as well as worked there after I graduated. And it was a rapid prototyping, 3D printing company. Did a lot of wax prototype and small part CNC machining for investment casting parts. So a lot of jewelry work, some dental, some aerospace. It was a good way to make turbine blades. That's not something you can usually machine pretty easily. From there, my brother and I started Cranston Holdings, and we partnered up with a gentleman that owns stereolithography.com, which, if you're familiar, stereolithography is the process of 3D printing, and it's the name of the file that's used commonly with 3D printers. So he had the domain name, and he also had an online quote engine, one of the first ones that would allow you to upload a stereolithography file to the website, select a material, select a process, cast parts, quantity parts, and then purchase them online. So we were the fulfillment shop for his website, as well as we worked with a network of vendors to fulfill laser sintered parts, urethane cast parts, plating, basically anything that we didn't do in-house, we would outsource to vendors. But we ran 8 stereolithography machines, some 3D printers, some small wax CNC machines, Envision machines. So basically took the jobs that were the best fit for internal and outsourced the rest. I was able to sell that company into Millennium Global, which is a medical device company, and they brought my brother and myself on for the startup of their cranial and craniofacial implant division. So we came on board, set up the quality system, 510K approvals, the plant, capital equipment purchases, and basically got everything for that line up and running. I left that company in January of this year and decided to start my own business, helping people in the medical field as well as inventors that aren't in the medical field. I have a lot of experience in rapid prototyping and other short-run production, which usually suits pretty well for inventors. Some of the IP work that I've done, one patent that was granted was for a mounting tab for a cranial implant, which is an integrated fixation system for cranial implants, where it's plates that are machined into the implant so that the surgeon can then fixate the implant to the patient's skull without having to use a titanium plate. So it reduces the cost of the plate, and it also reduces half the amount of screws that would need to be used for the surgery. Because usually you'd have to put a screw on each side of the plate. Screws are very expensive, plates are very expensive. We would sell this pretty inexpensively to get the overall cranial implant business from the surgeon. And I also worked on a cranial anchoring system and a fixation system for implants, not just in cranial, but in the rest of the body for doing tissue fixation and muscle fixation to an implant.
Could you say a word or two about how you sell cranial implants?
We were selling cranial implants through a independent sales rep network. So we didn't actually have direct sales employees. We would sell through distributors who already had pre-existing relationships with surgeons who would then sell the devices. So medical device sales are it's tricky to get into medical device sales. The large companies have large sales force, and there's a lot of small to medium, very small one-person distributors or sales reps, and then there's also medium-sized distributorships that will go out and say, 3 of you have different products. They'll carry all 3 of those products if they're in the same area. So if it's all 3 different neurological products, they'll carry all those and sell them independently, and then you pay them a commission.
Can you talk about, is there any sort of FDA approval for these things and what that was like getting it?
Yeah, I have all the classification and approval in slides as we go.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But you don't pay that distributor anything to push yours out of the 3 that he has in his bag.
No, you pay him a lot of money, yeah. You pay him heavily for
Because
that.
Something's got to
Mhm.
force him to say, I've got 3, but this is the good one.
Usually they carry 1 product of each line, but usually 30% does that for them. They're usually good with that.
Okay.
So the cranial implants would sell $10,000 to $15,000, and the distributor would take 30% for the sale.
But if he has 2 different kinds of cranial implants, that would be satisfactory for the job, as he chooses which one he wants to push to the doctor group.
They usually don't sign an agreement with someone that has multiple of the same product.
I
You
thought you
would
said they would have many of the same kind.
in the same area. So they might have 3 different neurological. They might have a titanium mesh implant from one manufacturer, and then a PEEK implant from another, and a PMMA implant from another manufacturer.
But they would be different applications.
Yes. So the surgeon might have a preference to it. And usually a lot of it's a surgeon driven. They'll bring the information there, but the surgeon either has a preference or he'll drive his decision based on the information they've given him.
Does the distributor pay you up front, or does he take the device and sell it, take his 15 or 30% or whatever, and then pay you? And what's your experience on a receivable, if in fact?
That's the best part. So the distributor is normally paid 30 days after the sale, or depending on whatever your agreement is. As the manufacturer, a lot of the times you're actually collecting from the hospital. You are holding the approval with the hospital. So if some distributors will buy the implant, but those are distributors that are large enough to have approval in the hospital. A lot of hospitals don't approve distributorships for the medical device they're selling. They approve the company that sells the medical device. So you go to a hospital, you say, I have cranial implants, and they want them. You sign up and you use your insurance, you use your 510K approval.
You being the company.
The company.
Yeah.
You use all your information and all your credentials to sell to that hospital, but your sales rep's the one that got you into that hospital. So you pay him and then you collect your money from the hospital, which is usually 30 to 120 days.
Do you inventory the product, so you have an inventory, and then have to wait until that particular unit is sold? Then once it's sold, you got another 30 days till you get paid?
It depends on the product. If you're selling if you have plates and screws, so you have a kit that's full of plates and screws, it's worth, say, $30,000. You can sign that to the hospital. Then when a surgery happens, your sales rep goes into the OR with the surgeon with your $30,000 kit that's been sitting in the hospital. And whatever they use out of that kit, he writes down on a charge sheet that then goes to the nurse who was at the surgery, and then you're able to bill based on that charge sheet. That copy goes back to you. You bill the hospital based on a charge sheet. You can sell that kit in full to the hospital for a discount, though.
So typically, something is off the production line, and the wait for payment is, on the average, how long?
It depends on the agreement with the hospital, but 30 days would be the fastest.
I'm just gonna adjust it a little bit there.
So you actually have a salesman going into the OR?
Mhm.
Okay, what if it's an emergency operation? Where's your salesman?
Depending on the product, they could call the salesman in. A lot of the salesmen will have kits with them, or they'll have access to them at the hospital, but most of these guys work and live in that hospital, so they're there all the time. If it's an emergency type of thing, there's a lot of products. If you go in and you got to get your finger stitched up right now, they'll pull something off the shelf, they'll rip it open, and that's a prepackaged stocking item. But for some of the more elaborate products or involved products, if you're going to do a spinal cord stimulator on somebody, your sales rep will usually be there during the surgery or after it's placed to then work with the patient. So they're really working more. They're not exactly sales reps as they are just working with doctors.
I'm sorry to dwell on this, but I sort of got his point there. But the salesman, who's part of the distributorship,
Mhm.
He doesn't have any technical skill. He's there just to keep track of what pieces of that kit is used from what he's offering you. We can't. And
No,
you
they're-
have technical skill to look at the doctor and say, hey, that's not how I planned it. But
They're
he doesn't.
trained by the companies. They're trained by the companies to represent the product, so they actually have more technical skill than the surgeon implanting the product most of the time, especially when it comes to electronic devices. They're the ones that actually program them. So if you come out and you've had this surgery, the surgeon's doing too many other things and procedures and products to keep up with a lot of this. So they understand the product, but they're not basically the subject matter expert in the OR when it comes to the product. The sales rep has to be. And that's where the 30% comes in. I've had guys call me while they were in surgery, like FaceTime, hey, what do I tell him? He wants to use this burr, he wants to use it. So they have direct lines of communication to make sure that what they're telling the surgeon is correct about that product.
Seems like a lot of responsibility for a guy who doesn't have a medical degree.
No, but he has specific training on the.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know what you mean. It's scary.
But how much does it cost to maintain one of these, for the moment, we'll call sales pros
Mhm.
on site? I mean, 24/7.
They're there anyway. You just pay them their commission.
I'm sorry?
They're normally there anyway. A sales rep a good sales rep works a certain area. So if you have a sales rep that is doing, that's selling your product, he's usually selling to that surgeon all the time. They're normally best friends. They work together all day long, 15 hours a day. So these groups are normally in that area at all times.
Okay.
So they just get up and go to work. Like you go to your office, they just go to the hospital.
Okay, he's on probably on a beeper or something.
Yeah, you just call them. I mean, if the surgeons need them, they call them at any
Just kind
time.
of amazed, what happens if you're out in the middle of one of these hospitals out in the middle of nowhere? Do you actually have one of these sales pros there? Or?
It depends on the product. Some of them they don't. It depends on what they're doing, how much the surgeon knows about it, and how much he relies on the sales representative. And not every product needs that degree. Cranial implants, after the surgeon does a few, they're pretty much fine doing them on their own. They still want somebody to interact with them during maybe the design of the implant, because the ones we were doing were always custom. So they would want maybe a webinar with a designer. The sales rep would facilitate that, or they'd have questions. But some of the other devices, like the more electronic or programmable devices out there, those are really done by the sales reps all the time. And those aren't really emergency surgeries either.
Okay,
A lot of it's planned.
okay.
Is every cranial implant custom?
Every cranial implant that I was manufacturing was custom. Not every cranial implant needs to be custom. They could be titanium mesh, which is cut and formed at the time, or they used to use PMMA, like a bone cement, and they would cut a mesh and then actually put PMMA on there and cure it, and then put that over the hole.
Where's M2 Systems? Where's it located?
It was in New Britain, Connecticut, but it's no longer in business. So this is, the only other thing was flexible spine plate was another patent that I have pending, and that was an invention with a surgeon that I worked with, who I became friends with, and she had an idea for a spine plate, wanted somebody to partner up with, so it seemed like a good idea. So what we'll be covering is what a medical device is, the different classifications of medical devices, the regulatory environment, 510(k) applications, design controls, and some tools that you can use when you're looking into how to classify your medical device. I'm going to cover each one of these in 1 or 2 slides at most. So there's time for questions, and I don't want to give you so much information, just kind of an introduction to what each one of these is. So what is a definition? What is a medical device? I abridged the FDA's definition of it. So it's basically a device that is an instrument, apparatus, implement, machine, contrivance, implant, or in vitro reagent. Anything used to diagnose a disease, condition, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease, intended to affect the structure or any function of the body, and which does not achieve its primary intent through chemical reaction. So essentially it says a medical device is almost anything that interacts with your body in a medical way, that the chemical reaction part down at the bottom is to preclude it from being a pharmaceutical device. So this covers a wide range of devices out there, and it gives the FDA kind of a wide scope of different devices that it can regulate. And a lot of the definitions are like that. This is an abridged version of what they actually listed the definition of, but I think it gives a pretty good idea of the scope of it. So you have 3 classifications of medical device. We saw in the first slide, there's class 1, class 2, and class 3. Class 1 are the lowest risk devices. So these are the devices that are only subject to general controls. So you have general controls, then you have which every device is subject to general controls, and exemptions for specific devices will exempt certain general controls, but no devices are exempt from all general controls. Some examples are bandages, a scalpel, rubber gloves. Class 2 devices, these require general and special controls, special labeling procedures, performance standards, and post-market surveillance. Which post-market surveillance can get a little tricky because basically after your product's out there, you have to come up with a way to a surveillance method to show that it's effective and there's no problems with it, and you have to do this after, for an implant, for instance, after it's implanted. So you have to come up with a way to actually surveil your own products. Some examples of this are power wheelchairs, infusion pumps, and cranial implants. Class 3 devices are the highest risk. Examples of these are pacemakers, heart valves, and breast implants, which were actually class 2 devices when they came out, and they were reclassed to class 3 devices after health problems and public safety problems. So one of the things that could happen is class 2 devices can then become class 3 devices, which I don't know the entire procedure, but it causes a lot of problems for people manufacturing class 2 devices if they're then reclassed to class 3 devices, because you have to comply with the regulations for the class that you're in. I'm not going to be covering too much with these. There's very involved. The procedure to get approval for these is very involved.
Are endoscopes in the class 2?
Yes. Is it? Endoscope?
What about a cochlear ear implant?
That would be class 2. 3?
Thanks to.
That's
2.
3.
It would be 3 before they started making them, and then is it a 3?
Not sure how.
See, this is the problem we run into. Before this presentation, Doug forwarded me an inventor who had a bariatric collar. So he made a collar for people that are obese and can't put regular neck collars around them. So it's a class 1 device, but it's also exempt from 510K approval, and it's also exempt from having the current good manufacturing practices. So a lot of these seem clear cut at first, and then when you start talking, usually anything with electricity or power is class 3 because it's a higher risk to the patient. I usually just Google it, followed by the words classification and FDA, and it comes up with a pretty
Like patient monitors, class 3.
Those could be class 3 because they have electricity and they're a danger to the patient. But they can also be class 2 depending on.
The FDA does have a great website. You can search and they'll tell you really explicitly they are class 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah.
Lots of examples.
I like to do Google, and then it brings me right to the FDA site.
How come hard valves are class 3 when they're mechanical devices?
Because of the risk of it. How come they are a class 3?
Yeah, they're just a basic check valve, essentially.
But they're very high risk, meaning that if it malfunctions, you die. Anything that causes instant death when malfunctioning is usually a class 3 device.
What's a blood sugar meter? Like, you know, the one where you break your finger and you take the lance to another device
Mhm.
to get the blood sugar.
Class 2?
I think 2. Yeah.
I would go with 2. Condoms are class 2 devices. Prevents disease. It has to do with the risk and what it's really doing. So if it's on, it gets tough. It does get tricky to know what.
If you get a incorrect blood sugar reading, it could kill somebody.
Yeah, and the risk, and you have to assess the risk of that happening. Yeah.
What do you hope for when you go to do this? Try to get the lowest number to your device so that you have the least amount of things to do to get it approved? I mean, I would assume class 1 you don't do much, and class 2 is harder than class 0.
Yeah, the goal is to get the correct one so you don't get in trouble.
Well, that's always, yeah, but the other thing, you know, if you're putting your own money into it, the goal is to try to do the least amount you have to do.
Yeah. Well, the gentleman I talked to before, he was saying, well, I don't have to register it because it's a class 1. But you have to register your facility with the FDA if it's a class, whatever class device it is. I don't believe there's any exemption to that.
What's this?
Class 1.
That's a non-durable piece of equipment, it's not medical.
What about the woodwalking cane? That's got to be a class 1.
No, if it's a non-durable piece of equipment,
No, it's
it
not.
doesn't have any therapeutic value, and you choose to use it because it helps you have a balance, it's not regulated.
I didn't know that.
I know because I have 2 cane patents.
Oh, really?
Saying it has no therapeutic value, it's just something you use to recover to keep your balance.
If you have a non-invasive technical device, the patient can use for his own good if he's smart enough, or he can use it and give the information to a doctor. What class would that come under? It's non-invasive.
What would he be giving to the doctor? The information?
Yeah.
You mean like a monitor or something like that? It would still be classified as a medical device.
But would it be 1 since it's non-invasive?
It would probably be a class 1. If you have like a heart monitor on a watch, it wouldn't, and then you give that information. But if its purpose is to monitor your heart for a medical purpose, it's most likely going to be a medical device and it'd be a class 1.
Okay, that would be class 2 actually.
The monitors?
The monitors would be class 2. Okay, when you asked a question about whether you want a class 1 versus a class 3, there's some argument to actually getting a class 3 device approved, because even though it's very expensive and can take a long time, once you have it, it's hard for someone to copy you. They have to do all the same work and all the same money that you did to get that same class 2 approval. Once you get a class 2 clearance, the burden for the next person to get it is very low. All they have to do is show that their device is equivalent, substantially equivalent to yours, and it sails right through the FDA.
But you won't get
No clinical data.
You won't be able to get a class 2 unless it's substantially equivalent to begin with.
Something else. Right.
Yeah. So even if you got approved as a class 2, you're only getting approved as a class 2 because there's something substantially equivalent. Otherwise, you'd have to do a pre-market authorization for the device if it's a new device, which is a long time and a lot of money. I mean, even though the fee for, if you're a small business, the fee for the application is still $54,000. If you're a large business, it's $150,000. And if you're a small business, they let you do the first one for free because everything else is so expensive in the clinical trials. You could run millions of dollars in years of time trying to get a PMA.
What is the PMA?
Pre-market authorization. It's when the device doesn't exist yet. So if you wanted to make a pacemaker out of a material that's never been used before, that would be a device that would need a pre-market authorization. If you want to make a pacemaker out of a material, a titanium case, just like it's made now, you could make it different, but it would be a class 3 device.
What if you have a remote sensor that is like taking your temperature, reading your temperature?
I don't mean to shortcut all of this, but I think you nailed it when you said do a search. So write down anything you're thinking about, go on to the FDA, and all your questions will be answered. I think you've got more slides.
Most of my experience is class 2 implantable devices. So a lot of it's really just trying to guess and surmise what it would be, but that is the best way.
One last confusing question. I have an EKG device on my smartphone. The blood shows right in the back.
Mhm.
What would that be classified as? I can send it directly to my doctor if I want to.
That's the Wild West right now, with medical device regulation.
It could.
It's changing monthly. Originally, they were not medical devices. Now the FDA has jumped in with some guidelines. It says that in some cases they are, some cases they aren't. So I don't know what that one is exactly.
And any of the transfer of information through software like that is a completely. It's unknown. There's a lot of things that aren't. It's catching up to that. So yeah, that's confusing on what it would actually be. So next I'm just going through basically abbreviated versions of the general controls to show these are the minimum that you would have to comply with. So even if it's a class 1 device, otherwise if it's not exempt from these, you'd have to comply with these. The first one is adulteration, which it states you cannot include any filtered, putrid, or decomposed substances, or if it's prepared, packed, or held under unsanitary conditions. Like I said, these are the minimum standard, but unsanitary could be different things depending on the device. So some of these are pretty broad definitions. Misbranding, the labeling of the package will include its contents, legible writing, specific warnings, and cannot contain false or misleading information about the device. The example is these 2 Oscar Mayer Wiener packages. The classic one didn't have the correct allergens. The FDA issued a recall, and they scrapped about 100,000 pounds of these things because it's considered misbranding. The pre-market notification and device registration. All medical devices, unless otherwise exempt, need a 510K. A lot of the class 1s are exempt from a 510K. A lot of the class 2s aren't. For small businesses, you have to qualify for the small business program, which is easy. You need tax returns for your business, and as long as you haven't made, I forgot what it was, like $100 million or something like that, you qualify. So it reduces that price by half. It does not reduce the facility registration fee at all, and that's a yearly fee. So every year you have to pay the FDA $3,382 as of this year. You register your facility, the trade names, the device names, pretty much a way for them to track your business. Banned devices, you cannot sell banned devices. That one's pretty straightforward. And I mean, some of these are left a little open too. You probably can't reconfigure a banned device and include parts of it into a device that's not banned. Notification, repair, and refund. The FDA can order manufacturers, importers, distributors to repair, replace, or refund the purchase price of any device that's an unreasonable health risk. I believe the FDA also gives you an unofficial hearing that will let you work with them on this, but ultimately they can recall the device, and hear about them on the radio and news all the time about devices that are recalled. Records and reports. Manufacturers, imports, and distributors of devices are to maintain reports to assure the devices are not adulterated or misbranded. This is also explained further in the 21 CFR Part 820, which is the FDA's quality system guidance document. And there's a lot, even if you're not required to comply with the current good manufacturing, you still have to have adequate records of the devices. If there's a recall, you need to know where every device is. and how to issue a recall. Like I said, most of my experience is in class 2 implantables. So there's a procedure you have for if the time comes where you have to recall, you need to be able to show that you have a procedure to the FDA. And when the FDA comes in for audits, they go right for your records, and they kind of work backwards. Well, they'll come in and say, all right, well, you're making a product using this material. Show me where you received this material. Then show me how that's controlled. Show me what devices were made from that material. Show me the records of where these devices went. Show me the training of the person that received the material to make sure that they were properly trained on incoming material. So it keeps snowballing into itself, and then you basically just have to make sure that you keep adequate records, because these aren't like other devices where if it breaks, it doesn't really matter that much. Restricted devices. Restricted device can only be sold with an oral or written authorization from a licensed practitioner or under conditions specified by regulation. So certain devices, like the device I worked on, we needed a RX form to sell it. Most of the time people...
Sorry, do you have to carry special product liability insurance?
Yeah. Usually the liability insurance...
What was the question, please?
If you have to carry special product liability insurance for these?
I should think a mandatory recall for cranial implants would be awkward.
Yeah. A lot of people walk around with helmets. It's a good time to get in the helmet business.
What if you don't want to give it back, right?
Yeah, they're not coming out.
Do you put chips on any of your devices?
No.
In other words, the chip would follow where the guy went.
Like an RFID. Like the ones they do with the dogs, with the neck thing. They should
Everything in the Army is that way.
Oh, there's people that have been working on patents and things for adding sensors into basically every medical device, any type of medical device. So if you had a bone screw or a plate, you could put a sensor in there to monitor other things while it's in there. So that's been a topic, and like we were talking about with the other software and the technology, it's tough, and it's tough to get a lot of that approved, and there's a lot of money that needs to be spent for that. But as far as insurance, it's very expensive. They usually go off your gross sales when they price it instead of your net sales, which would be better. Quality systems and current good manufacturing. The FDA requires methods used in and the facilities and controls used for the manufacturing, packaging, storage, and installation of devices to conform to current good manufacturing practices. So the FDA has quality system regulations that they have you comply to. Is everybody familiar with ISO standards and quality systems, more or less? They're not the same things as the FDA, but there's a push in the new ISO 2016 regulation where you can do a single auditor program and have your ISO auditor with a more stringent audit be the same thing as an FDA inspection. FDA inspections usually happen every 2 to 3 years for devices. So you're not actually inspected when you start selling a device, you're inspected after you start selling a device, after you've received approval. So the FDA usually doesn't show for about 2 years till you've already been marketed and selling devices. So this is just kind of a brief overview of how to file a 510K and what a 510K even is. First, you must determine whether or not your product is substantially equivalent to an existing product. So we talked about that a little bit. If you have an implant for, say, a plate to fuse two bones together, you're going to make that out of titanium. There's probably 20 other people that make that out of titanium. So you can make your own specific designs and your own specific product and case for that, but ultimately you would show the FDA, you'd have to find out and make sure that someone else is doing that. If you had a sensor that was reporting information to a doctor, that's kind of where there's not a lot of things right now. So there's not a lot of substantial equivalence to that. Every device needs a 510K unless otherwise exempt. Some of the things it includes: a cover letter, indications for use, which is what indications a person has to have to use your device. In the cranial implants, it was a bony void in your skull, you would need a cranial implant. Your drawings, materials you would use, and access to master files. Master files are a file that a manufacturer of raw material would have on file with the FDA. So if you're going to use a PEEK polymer, you would go to a company that sells PEEK polymers and ask them for a letter of authorization to use their master file in your FDA application. Because it's already on file, it's already been cleared, they're familiar with it, and it makes the process go faster. A summary of your 510K, truthful and accuracy statement, basically saying that you're liable if you've lied in that application at all. Your name of the company, trade names, DBAs. They want to know whatever your name of your product is going to be called and be called in the field. And that has to do also with the marketing material of your product. We won't really get into that, but there's regulations on how you market your product, what you say about your product, and how you brand it, and whether or not those line up with the names and trade names you have for the FDA. The comparison chart for the substantial equivalents, they actually want a chart that shows the ones that you are substantially equivalent to. Save the inspector some time. Your intended use. You have to be very specific with an intended use. I had something where I said it wouldn't include the jaw, but they wanted it to say it would not include the mandible, maxilla, anything above a certain point. If you can't cover airways with your device and it's being used in the skull or face. So you have to get specific, and they usually come back with intended use. If there's no other devices that are used in that area, you won't be able to say, hey, we're going to use this material in this region, whereas nobody else is using that material in that region yet. You can't use that as an intended use, even though it's being used as an implantable device somewhere else in the body. Labeling is also filed with your 510K, so your product labeling can't significantly change. A lot of information is on your labeling, shelf dates, sterilization, the product names. Basically there's a set of criteria that you have to follow and a minimum amount of things you have to put on your labels and file that with the 510K. If you have a significant labeling change or any significant change in the product after filing 510K, you have to refile or file for a change to that 510K. And the instructions for use, which are it's basically the booklet of how to use your product. It could have sterilization instructions in there. And it's important because if you're recommending a hospital sterilize a product in a way that they can't sterilize it, they can't sterilize it in a way that they can sterilize it. If you tell them they have to use ETO sterilization and a hospital doesn't have ETO sterilization, they can't just use steam sterilization. Or if you tell them you want a 5-minute gravity cycle on a steam sterilization and they only do a 4-minute on everything, they're most likely not going to want to program their machine special for your device. So it's important to know what the hospitals can do before you instruct them on how to use your device and before you write that. Lab testing. Something's going to be required lab testing wise. This can range from 10,000. I did one that was 6,000 to I had a quote for 150,000 for a product. Usually you want to make your own lab testing requirements. There's standards that will tell you exactly how to do it. You can call a lab and ask them how to get a product approved and what testing you need, and they'll give you everything that needs to be done. There's some leeway where you can make your own protocols as long as you can justify the safety and effectiveness of that lab testing in the application and the FDA approves it. Otherwise, you have to go back and do testing in a certain amount of time or your application stops.
You were saying that it's hard to be the first one to pioneer an intended use. How is it that a breakthrough occurs or whatever? So say there's an urgent need, unmet need for some particular location to have a part that does one item or another. Is it just a question of lab testing, or how does a new product get into the market where it hasn't been such a similar product is currently not available?
Through a PMA process, which is a long process. You have to do clinical trials. You have to prove that it's safe. I usually do animal testing, clinical trials, lab testing. There's a panel that the FDA convenes that you have to present to. So you have your doctors and scientists and everybody working on it actually present your case to the FDA. If it's a humanitarian or unmet need, there's exemptions where you can actually put a device into the market on a very small basis, or if it's a device that's not marketable for another country. If you're going to a third world country, kind of like an orphan drug, you can sell a device on a limited scope as long as it's an emergency need.
And then what, if you had a good record, then you could go from there to a broader market for it?
Usually if it's a device that's going to have mass use, you would normally go through the PMA process and that wouldn't be available to you, but you can use any data that you have about your device as long as it's collected properly, even if it's used in other countries on a smaller scale, or if you're doing clinical trials outside of the US, which is where a lot of clinical trials happen. You can use all that data in your application to the FDA as long as the data is good.
Yeah, you would think that if you had a new item that had never been used, that each time you used it or had an application, you'd learn something, there'd be a learning curve, and the product wouldn't be static, it would be adapting all the time, right? And if it's changing all the time, then you have to keep all the documentation, I guess, current on it, because you can start off using one material and not be satisfied with that and try something else that works better.
Yeah, which would push innovation. The bar to have a safe and effective device, and we'll go into the design a little bit, is really having a static device and knowing that it's safe and effective for the majority of people using it.
Is this then basically a barrier to entry then, that in order to, if you have an interest and you're very good with mechanical things and whatever, and you want to get into this field, the only way to do it is with some large, well-funded organization that has the connections and the capital resources to get something to market?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge barrier to entry. And it's done if everybody can get into it with all kinds of different devices, it would improve I think that it would spur more innovation, but it would also create huge safety issues at the same time. So a lot of the time you get to a certain point with your device and then you'd be able to work with a larger company. A lot of larger companies want to see you in a clinical stage with some success in the device before they really get involved in it. They need to know that it's on its way to succeeding. So even if you're just good with things, have a good device, and it still might not get you there.
Do you want to talk about the de novo process? You might answer this question.
Go for it.
So
I can drink some water for a second.
historically, a new device had to go through the PMA process, which is expensive and very burdensome. Fairly recently, the FDA appreciates that there are some new technologies that will help people that aren't high risk to the patient. So they've created this de novo classification where you go to them as a class 3. They say, no, you're not class 3, it's not that high risk, but there's no equivalent device. We're going to send you through this de novo process, which is kind of like a 510K, but different enough. It's not the exact structure, but the goal is to get you on the market in much less time than you would if you had to do a traditional PMA process. Fairly new, still being worked out, but some folks are having success in that way.
Thank you. All right, so moving on to design, and this will answer some of your questions too about how the design process works and how it's kind of creates a static device. So you start off, you need a design and development plan. You need design inputs, which are basically, the example is, the design inputs are subject to objective criteria for verification that the design outputs are adequate. So a catheter outer diameter must be no larger than the previous design, that is a 8 French catheter. So if you have a design input that says this cannot be larger than an 8 French catheter, your design output has to match your design input. So you get all your inputs together, you come up with your design output matches your input, then it goes to the design review process where you review that those design outputs match the design inputs. Then it's verified through a verification process and documented. Design outputs match design inputs. The review is done correctly. Then the validation process is to prove that the device that you are now making or that you've now designed is actually doing what it's supposed to do. Because it's all about meeting the intended use of the device. So even if you get through this and everything matches and everything looks good and you said you want it to be this big and it is this big, if you can't validate that through all this you're achieving the goal of a functioning device for its intended purpose, then it's not a good design. From the validation, it goes to the design transfer, where the design is transferred to manufacturing. And then during that time, if there's any design changes, you would need a approved process for design changes. It could be a committee or some type of approval process. Through all of this, you're documenting, you're creating your design history file. So your design history file contains all this information of your device. It's basically a blueprint for your device and how you've justified the things you've done. Then the FDA comes in and looks at your design history file when they're evaluating your device. When making a custom device, this gets a little tricky, and I've run into all kinds of different problems with the FDA as well as ISO auditors defining a device master record versus a device history file, because each one of these devices we were making was custom, so it doesn't exactly have a device history file, and it went back and forth in a couple different ways to figure it out. But this is how if you're going to produce a product that's a production product and it's not customized, this is how it would go. So this is just an example of some of the risk element of designing a device. So throughout the device, you need to keep in mind that you're trying to mitigate risk. This is one way to do it. This is changing a little bit. Risk is really being looked at throughout the entire quality system right now. It's changing in the new ISO standard where they want risk control throughout the entire system, not just in the design and process, but through the whole quality system. But this is something I've used in the past. So you basically convene a team that's involved with the design or process of the device, and you'd create a device failure mode effects analysis. So you come up, you put your whatever part you're working on. You have a document number. Everything in a quality system is going to have a document number, rev number. You have to keep all the revs of a document for document control procedures. You'd have a form revision date, which is a revision date of the form, not of the layout of the form, but actually the information in the form. Process owner, and then you'd have the team. So you would look at a component, you look at what function the component actually does in the product. You look at the potential failure mode for that product, the potential failure effects, the impact on safety, and then you'd assess the severity based on a chart of a graded numbering system of how severe it is by occurrence, or basically death being the most severe. Potential causes, so you list all conceivable failures and failures that could happen in that mode, and that would give you the occurrence of it. Again, that's on like a 1 to 100, 1 to 1000 scale. And then you would look at your current process controls and your ability to detect the problems, and then you assign a risk priority number. Then you'd basically look for actions to reduce that risk. You'd assign people to reduce it, you give them a target date to reduce it, and then you list all your preventative actions that you've taken, and then you reassess this again. This is designed to go on while this is meant to go on while you're designing the product or your process. People will do this after the fact. They'll design a product and then they'll go back and justify the risk of the product after, which is not good practice. So an example of this, if you had a component, we had an implant that had holes in it. One component could be a hole. What's that function? It allows blood to flow through the implant, keeping tissue alive, letting hair grow. What's a potential failure? The hole could not be drilled all the way through. What's an impact on safety? Tissue's affected. Then you assess your severity based on how you've set up your severity ratings. List all the conceivable failures. Maybe the drill's not long enough. for every implant. So the occurrence of that could be 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000. You'd give a number to that. Then you would look at your existing controls, your inspection, say, and that would say, well, every one we have to put a go no go gauge through that hole, so we know if there's a hole not drilled. So the detection is very high. Then you give it a risk priority number by multiplying all those together. Detection has a lower number, severity has a higher number, so that you're not multiplying large numbers. Then you'd recommend actions, assign people, take all those actions, and then redo the process. And hopefully you lower your risk. The tool like this is good when an inspector comes in because they immediately look at this and then they just look at your highest risk and then they just go right for that. So if your highest risk is going to be drilling holes, they're going to go through your machine calibration, they're going to go through your inspection records, they're going to go to your employee training. They'll look at those things first, and a lot of people will trend these numbers as a key performance indicator in their product. So you need key performance indicators to tell whether or not your product's performing the way you want it to. So if they see these trending in the wrong way and your risk numbers are going up for certain items instead of going down over time, that's a major red flag for an FDA or an ISO auditor. It's fun trying to figure out. We only have like 2 more slides, so I know questions went a little long. So this was the product classification that we were talking about earlier on the FDA site. The FDA site is great. There's tons of information, guidance documents on probably anything you can think of. I usually use Google to search the FDA because sometimes it's faster, but poking through the FDA and putting in product names and devices and stuff. If you don't really know what you're talking about at all, Google can be quicker by putting fda.gov after it, if you don't know classifications and things like that. So this is on accessdata.fda.gov, and it's a good tool. The FDA has always been really friendly whenever I've asked them anything. I email them questions. If I've had questions during the time, they're pretty easy to work with. The inspectors have been pretty good as well. People usually get scared of them and a bad rap. Another tool to look through is the Good ID. The Good ID is it's a unique identifying number that the FDA required all manufacturers to put on their device so that to the general public, a lot more information about the company, the brand, the product codes, the device, if it's sterile or not, sterilization procedures, issuing agency, all this stuff, if you click these, they drop down into more expandable menus. And there's certain amount of this information that a supplier has to give voluntarily, and some of it they can also put up on this site. So if you make, I don't even know which one I put up there. If you make one of these needles, each model of that needle has its own unique identifier. So if you're selling batches of these, it has a unique identifier. You sign up with a regulatory agency that gives out prefix numbers that track your device, and you can buy them in lots. So you'd buy an 8-digit prefix and you'd be able to register 1,000 products under that if you pay them like $1,500. And then you have to maintain that every year as well. So for class 3 devices, they've been in effect 2 years, 2000. They just did class 2. We had to do class 2 in September of 2016. Before that it was 2014 for class 3, and I think it's 2018 for class 1. So eventually all devices will be up there. So if you had a fake hip, implantable hip, that's not your own, which would make it fake. You would go on this site and you can get information about it if you know the model number or if you know the manufacturer. And you can look through tons and tons of different information and whether or not they ship sterile, who manufactures. You can see like Stryker has a bunch of different places where it's made. So it's good because if you go into a hospital, they can use tools like this to look up the information about a product. If they lose your IFU and don't know how to sterilize, you can have the information up there, whether or not it's shipped sterile. So it's definitely useful, and it's a pretty big burden for manufacturers to put all this up. But there's plenty of consultants and consulting companies that will come in and they have automated systems to upload your information if you export your data correctly right up to the site and verify it for you too. Questions?
If you wanted to take a device to Canada, Mexico, or Europe, do you have to go through the same local procedure, or would they accept a finding by the FDA that it's an approved
device?
No, they don't accept FDA anywhere except the U.S. Canada has the Health Canada. Does Mexico do regulations, or they just let everything? I can't remember.
They do.
They all have. Every country has their own medical device system. They're usually, most of them are less stringent than the FDA, and it's also a different selling environment. If you're going to Canada, pricing is different. The single auditor program with the ISO 1345 2016 regulation will allow you to go into different. They're trying to get it into different countries so that you can go and basically do one audit with an ISO, because ISO's international standards organization. So if you go, you can sell as long as you're FDA compliant in the US, but you cannot go to some other countries if you are not ISO certified for your device. They won't accept your device without ISO certification. And sometimes you need representatives in the country. You need people on the ground. Sometimes they hold the license. Sometimes you hold the license. Sometimes you don't want them to hold the license because then they hold control of your product. But there's a lot of nuances to each country.
So what's your latest, greatest consulting job that you're pushing now?
I'm working with a company on an implantable device, cranial maxillofacial area, and I can't really talk about any of it.
Oh, it's not.
No, I'm just NDAs and things for that. But kind of in the same area I'm working. I left that company in January, so I had I didn't really have anything lined up, but I have other people that I know in the industry, so I've just kind of fallen into different consulting gigs that way. Yes.
How do you figure your fees per the difficulty of the device, or just an hourly, or what?
Depends. Hourly. I've quoted people hourly or just based on device. 510K filings are pretty common. So kind of a case by case. It's usually everything in medical is more expensive. Like the regulations are more expensive, the devices are more expensive, there's more money in it, so it's usually a little bit higher charge than normal.
If you were a patient and you needed an implant, does the patient have much of a say in this, or ultimately do they just sort of rely on the doctor to pick the right brand and approach to the solution? Or maybe you might get a couple of opinions and then try to use common sense to kind of figure out what the way to go is?
Yeah, it's kind of hard because if your surgeon does one thing and he likes doing that and he's a good surgeon, he has a good reputation, he's not going to do something else just because you want him to. If he's been doing traditional knee replacements, he's not going to start doing a 3D printed knee if that's just not what he does. So there's a lot in there where, depending on your healthcare, depending what area you're in, the type of products they're going to use, a lot of hospitals won't pay for a peak cranial implant because it's expensive, but they'll pay for a PMMA implant. Some surgeons think peak's great, some surgeons think PMA is great, some people think titanium's okay. There's a lot of gray area in that, and you can't interact with patients as a manufacturer. They can go on websites and read everything they want, but you can't as a company interact. So if you were making a device, you can't actually reach the patient. You can reach the surgeon or the physician.
You know, in this field, what would you say is the biggest improvement over the last 10 years? And what do you expect in another 5 or 10 years? I assume things are getting better, and there may be some new breakthrough technology like 3D printing or whatever that will make personalized parts for people and such.
I think that's going. I hope it goes more towards restoring the body to the way it was. A lot of the surgeries you'll see restore if you have a back problem. You have a back problem, right? Have you had surgery? No. I had surgery on my back, and I had part of a disc removed. I've had friends that have surgeries that they remove the whole disc, they pack a spacer in there, and then they basically put a plate on top of it, and they stop you stop your spine from moving. They immobilize it to get rid of the pain, or they'll fuse joints together. So some of the 3D printing, especially with the knee, they cut your knee to fit the implant. So instead of making a knee that was like your knee before, they just cut the majority of your knee off to put the implant in there. Or hip cups. They basically use a cutting guide to cut off what they need to be able to use the device that they want. So I hope that it would go more towards 3D printing. Some applications for 3D printing are good, some of them aren't. It's good for customization, but a lot of those things can still be machined.
That kind of reminds me, in the early days of skiing, they recommended a stiff ski boot. And they used to say if you wore a ski boot long enough, it would conform to the shape of your foot. But the reality was that your foot would end up conforming to the shape of the boot.
Goes with the line boots. Line flow,
exactly.
didn't work. But Scott came out with the line boots.
Well, I just want that, I am the recipient of 2 knee implants.
Yep.
And I did a lot of checking around, when you're getting ready for that, what implant should you use and all this kind of stuff. But push comes to shove, when I talked to the doctor who did it, he said, I've been working with this Smith and Nephew thing for the last 15 years, and I've done 5,000 of them. Would you like me to use something new, or would you like me to?
Yeah. And that's where a lot of the control is.
And he had a whole building set up just to do knee implants of that type with tooling and everything in place. It was like a factory.
Yeah.
But the answer came about, I don't want anything new. I like the one that's been successful 5,000 times.
Yeah. There's early adopters sometimes for things, and then
At what stage do you get involved? You have a brand new technology development. Are you coming in early on? Or?
So far I've worked mainly with people that are in class 1, class 2 devices. I don't have a lot of experience in PMAs. I understand the procedure, mostly in things that are already out there, substantially equivalent devices that are out there.
Who determines pricing of a medical device? First question, and what have you seen in the progress of inflation of device pricing? And ask that in light of the last, 7 years of this, Affordable Care Act, which all the controversy boils down to who's going to pay. And thirdly, whenever any additional cash is devoted to a particular segment of the economy, usually prices start to go up quite quickly. So what do you see in that area? What do you see in pricing, how a price is made? Maybe hold forth on that.
So price is usually determined on a hospital by hospital and region basis. If you want to sell to Boston, you're selling cheap. You're selling a device that you maybe sell twice the price in Oklahoma, half as much to a Boston market. We've cut prices. I've seen prices cut, just talking to sales reps, 50% for some of those markets. If you have volume, manufacturers will cut price for that. If you want to undercut competitors, you just go with a lower price. That doesn't always mean you'll get them. If you go in with a lower price in an area like a Boston, you might have a manufacturer that has multiple products in that area. So maybe you can make a plate better than anybody else, but you don't have screws for that plate. So you make the plate better and cheaper, but you're selling against someone that sells the plate and the screws and the instruments. They can discount all the other instruments based on the fact that you're buying a full price plate. So the landscape of pricing medical devices isn't a product on product. You can sell 2 pens, but somebody can be selling a pen and chairs, the entire classroom. You're not going to get in because you have a lower price pen. There's more price spread out in the area. So you don't always know. Usually the market a lot of people will come in at the same rate. A lot of hospitals will ask you to at least match a price if a surgeon has a preference, but it could revolve around a contract. And there are exclusive contracts, not 100% exclusive, but pretty close. Like unless you can offer something different, you can't get in.
Well, hospitals put out bids, and can you hit a bid or
Yeah, no contract can be absolute, but they can put out a bid. You can bid on a product, but there are other factors that go into the bid. And you also have to have people go in front of committees to have these products approved. And if it's a busy hospital, if you're only going to sell 20 of these things a year, they don't want to convene a committee. Nobody really wants to take the time to bring that in front of the committee if that's your only product. So there's hurdles in there. And I've seen prices go down over the years. And the more competition that gets into a market, there's going to be prices going down. But there's also prices going down because of the Affordable Care Act. There's also regulations where if you perform a surgery, you have to wait so long to perform another surgery on the same patient for the same condition. So if you were going to implant a cranial implant, they take those out and they don't put one in for like 6 weeks. They don't put one in right away, and they have to wait until a certain time period passes so they can bill it again too.
So the medical efficacy in that case comes down to the billing cycle.
The billing cycle, and they also have to, if there's instances where if they don't use the best product or if the surgery doesn't work out, there's a push to sell for quality on a product, because if you are the hospital and you have a bunch of people using a product and they're coming back for revision surgeries, you're paying out of pocket for those because they're coming back too quick. And the billing, it's in the same billing cycle, so it's basically in the same care. So you have like a time limit of the amount of care that you give somebody. So if they're in and out of the hospital in 5 days and they have an infection, if they come back, the hospital doesn't get to bill that again as a new surgery.
That's the reason, by the way, a lot of doctors like to do knee replacements one at a time.
Yeah, and around
And
Christmas,
the reason is
they have to buy gifts.
two operations.
One more question.
So, trending in the medical field is in businesses that have been formed to reuse single-use devices, like surgical staplers or fixators. What's happening on that front? Is that being pushed out of the U.S.? I mean, I'm sure it's happening overseas, but I mean in the U.S.
What do you mean using?
Like sterilizing, repackaging, and reusing a device that was meant to only be used once.
You can't.
It's called reprocessing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of new regulation regarding that. New regulation. It's not
Yeah.
gone away. It's just very strict now. They follow precise guidelines because of some serious issues with endoscopes and other products.
Yeah, because if you don't have your device as a reusable product, you can't. The device, but the hospital can do. The hospital will end up doing anything they really want anyway. In that case, if you sell a device, you have to have it as a reusable reprocessing device. You need instructions and testing for that. You can't, like cranial implant. You have one in there. You have to go in for surgery and have that taken out. They can't put that back in there. They can put it back in there, and they do put it back in there because they flash sterilize it in the OR and they stick it back in your head. But you can't do that because the device was never tested for that, and there's no situation that it was tested to say that that was safe or effective to do. So the same thing with reprocessing single-use devices. They're only supposed to be single-use devices.
All right, well, would everybody join me in thanking the speaker? I'd like to say a word or two about our next speaker. On the 25th of next month, we're going to have Cliff Anico, who published a book on crowd investing. It's remarkable in my mind that it came out so quickly after the SEC regulations were passed, which was done in January of 2016. I recall talking to him about it after the Jobs Act was passed in 2012. He was waiting for the SEC for so long to finally get those regulations out. And when I told him they were available and they were out, he was so excited, and he immediately went to press with his new book, which I happen to read, called The Crowdfunding Handbook, but in fact it's about crowd investing, which is really very interesting because it means you can take on a whole bunch of business partners for very little money, and they can all be kooks or cranks or both. So that's interesting. After the meeting, some people like to gravitate to Penny's Diner. Are you going to Penny's Diner,
Yes.
Moses? Okay, so if you know, Moses is going there and he can lead the way. And some people like to go there to have a chat and maybe have a bite to eat. And thank you all for coming out on this rainy night. I think we had a very nice showing. Thank you. Doug, what was the date of the next? The 25th. I'm going to post April abstract on the website.
I actually pushed for a guy to physicists turn
There are certainly and I knew that for a while.
Did you say you guys are working for Jordan General? Typically, you have computers, electronic here, they have a whole range of parts. And they're typically more specialized in order to process them like washing machines. Yeah, if you want to join, batteries would be interesting. Where they have a way to process
Something else.
payments here, look at my iPad, you can do it online. Lightning, it's a $45 a year charge to be a member of IACT. We haven't raised our rate in many years. Certainly, before I became.
Last year, something I didn't update you. Last year represents.
No, remember it was a bell. Oh, it was a bell, okay. Chairframe extension. Which I felt was a great idea. Yeah, I mean, you can join in now, or you can join online. Nobody gets charged. Okay. The problem is the Marines, what's it's made parking very tight. And I myself can't park where I normally would, so I park over by the quick center. And then I walk from there.
Exactly. That was clear evidence that came to me before.
I don't want anyone
Working with four Navy
Value out of the meetings, and I also record them. And I just remembered I have to turn off this recording because I've been